Hi there, and welcome back to Reddit Confessions. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's raw. It's what happens when someone thinks you'll always forgive them, until you don't. The glass hit the floor before her sentence finished. People gasped. Someone even clapped. I remember that because it was the most surreal applause I'd ever heard. Like they were watching a performance, not a marriage unraveling. She had no idea I was already done long before she gave me the choice. Stay and listen, or walk away. She said it with a smile. A dare. The kind of smirk you only see on someone who thinks they've won. The music behind us dipped for a second, just long enough for her voice to ring out over the rooftop. People turned, and I froze. Not because I was unsure, but because I couldn't believe she actually said it. Out loud. In front of everyone. Her friends. Her coworkers. My friends, too. Or at least they used to be, before they started calling me Sweet Daryl in that tone that sounds like pity in formal wear. I looked at her. Red dress. Wine stain on the hem. Ring still on her finger, tilted slightly from where she'd been fidgeting with it all night. And I realized something right then. She wasn't trying to fix things. She was staging them. Like it was theater. Like I was some side character in her new era of bold decisions and half-baked independence. She wanted an audience. She wanted a villain. And I wasn't going to give it to her. So I said nothing. I just reached into my pocket. Keys. Wallet. Silence. She tilted her head like I was a puppy who'd missed a command. Did you hear me? She asked. Louder now, like she was still performing. I nodded. And walked past her. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just calm. Mechanical. No speech. No tears. No accusations. I left her there. Standing on a rooftop surrounded by people who had no idea what came before that moment. People who laughed with her when she told them I used to cry when I ran out of almond milk. People who cheered when she danced with that guy. Yeah, that guy, the one she said was just someone from work. She didn't follow. She didn't even move. But someone else did. Her sister. The only one who ever really looked me in the eye at family dinners. She caught up with me at the elevator and said just 5 words. She didn't think you'd leave. I didn't answer. The ding of the doors said enough. So, here I am. Telling you what I couldn't tell her. Not because I want sympathy. But because when a man finally walks away after being dared in front of a crowd, it doesn't mean he's weak. It means he finally remembered he has legs. I didn't go home that night. I didn't go to a bar either, or crash on a buddy's couch like the guys do in movies. No. I drove around for hours in my aging Hyundai with the low tire pressure light blinking like it was mocking me. I ended up in a diner off Route 47 at 2 in the morning, sipping burnt coffee surrounded by laminated menus and the smell of old bacon grease. It was the perfect place for a guy like me. Someone who'd just been humiliated in front of a rooftop full of smiling strangers who couldn't tell the difference between a breakdown and a show. And you know what? Couldn't sleep. Couldn't even cry. I just sat there, playing her words over and over in my head. Stay and listen or walk away. The way she emphasized walk away like it was some throwaway threat. Like I wouldn't do it. Like I couldn't. Because let's be honest, she thought I was too soft. Too predictable. The kind of man who apologizes just for being upset. And maybe I was. For too long. We weren't always like this. But looking back, I can't figure out when the real distance started. It wasn't a big explosion, it was a slow erosion. Little comments. Small eye rolls. The way she started correcting me in public. Like she couldn't let me finish a sentence without adjusting the details. One time I said we met in the campus bookstore, and she cut me off to say, actually, it was the hallway near the bookstore. Like that mattered. Like that changed anything. But that's how it was lately. Everything I said became a setup for her punchline. And I kept trying to laugh along just to avoid tension, even as I sank deeper into the role of her emotional punching bag. What's worse is, she wasn't even cruel in a traditional way. She was carefully dismissive, like I wasn't important enough to argue with anymore. The guy from the rooftop, his name's Avery. I learned that name the hard way, from a tagged photo on her coworker's Instagram 2 weeks earlier. They were at a bar. Late. She told me it was a team outing. She came home smelling like someone else's cologne, and when I asked about it, She said it must have been from a hug. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. Because once you stop believing, everything else falls apart, right? Anyway, after the party, I turned off my phone. For the first time in years, I didn't care what she had to say. I didn't want to see her texts. I didn't want to hear the half-hearted voice memos that always started with, "Okay. Look, I didn't mean it like that. I just needed quiet." And for once, I had it. But she didn't. When I finally turned my phone back on late the next afternoon, it was chaos. 18 texts, 2 missed calls from her mom, 1 from her sister, and a single voicemail from Callie. It started with her laughing. No, really, laughing. She said, "Wow, you actually left." Then silence. Then a deep breath. "You're so dramatic, Daryl. I gave you a choice. You didn't even want to hear me out. That's on you." On me. That's when I realized she wasn't shocked. She wasn't sad. She was offended. Offended that her pawn had made a move she didn't script. Offended that I broke character. And that's when I decided I wasn't going back. Not to get closure. Not to collect my things. Not even for Moose, our dog. Because deep down I already knew she'd drop him off at her sister's once things got inconvenient. Callie didn't do mess. She curated her life like an aesthetic, and I was a smudge on the canvas. But here's the part that still burns. The next day, she posted a picture from that same party. Her holding a glass of champagne, Avery standing behind her, blurred just enough to be deniable. The caption? New energy, new season. No mention of the husband she humiliated. No mention of the marriage she buried under sarcasm and wine spritzers. Just vibes. So I did something she didn't expect. I booked a storage unit. And then I called a lawyer. The storage unit smelled like dust, cardboard, and regret. I stood in the middle of it on a cloudy Wednesday afternoon with a clipboard in one hand and my wedding ring in the other. That ring hadn't left my finger in 12 years. I'd only taken it off once, during a plumbing mishap when I nearly lost it down the garbage disposal. Even then, I held on to it like it was sacred. Now I was about to drop it into a beat-up shoebox, alongside an old iPod, a faded concert ticket, and the necklace she gave me on our 5th anniversary that I hadn't worn in years because, frankly, it started to feel more like a choke chain than a gift. I started packing the rest of my life into brown Home Depot boxes with little labels like bathroom, books, and stuff I can't explain yet. It was methodical, peaceful, even a quiet rebellion against the noise of everything. She turned our life into curated chaos disguised as ambition, detachment masked as evolving. You know what I realized while taping up that second box of kitchen stuff? She didn't just stop loving me. She started resenting me. Somewhere along the line, I went from being her safe space to being her mirror, and she hated what she saw. Not because I was cruel or careless, but because I reminded her of everything she was trying to outgrow. Domesticity, stability, predictability. I wasn't wild or unpredictable or poetic. I didn't throw paint at canvases or know how to network at those artsy rooftop things where everyone drinks rose out of jars and calls each other darling. I made spreadsheets. I balanced the budget. I overcooked pasta and apologized for it twice. I listened. I stayed. And in her world, staying became synonymous with stagnation. So she started rewriting me. In front of her friends, I was the clingy one. The guy who meant well, but just didn't get it. She would say things like, "He's not a bad guy, he's just soft." Like softness was something to pity, or worse, outgrow. I became a caricature. And she was so convincing about it that even I started to believe I was the problem. That I needed to change. That maybe if I became more confident, more mysterious, more fun, I'd be enough again. But that version of me, the one she mocked and sculpted for social media captions, that wasn't me. That was her exit strategy. The lawyer I met wasn't dramatic. His name was Felix, a short, no-nonsense guy with tired eyes and an office that smelled like old coffee and vanilla candles. A weird combination that somehow made me feel safe. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He just slid a folder across the desk and said, "When you're ready, sign the back page." I asked, "What if she fights it?" He tilted his head and said, "Then we're prepared." That word, prepared, hit different. I hadn't felt prepared for anything in years. I'd been surviving, ducking my head, smiling through it. Now, for the first time in a long time, I was choosing. A few days later, I started getting texts from people we hadn't seen in months. Old friends, acquaintances, even her aunt who once told me I was the first real man Callie ever dated. They weren't asking how I was. They were asking what happened. Apparently, she was already telling her version, that I snapped at the party, that I embarrassed her, and stormed out in front of everyone for no reason. No mention of the ultimatum. No mention of the smirking coworker with his hand permanently hovering near her hip. Just a sanitized story where she played the shocked wife, confused and heartbroken by her husband's outburst. I didn't defend myself. I didn't send long texts explaining everything, because I'd spent the last 5 years defending a man I didn't even recognize anymore. And I was done. What I did do, though, was send her one thing, a single envelope. Inside it, a short note. The version of me you've been describing doesn't live here anymore. Feel free to delete him. And beneath the note, my wedding ring. No speech, no threats, no begging, just an ending. One she never saw coming. The ring should have been the final page. A punctuation mark on a story that had spiraled from a quiet love into an exhausting performance. I thought naively that it would be enough, that she would get the message, file it away in her curated little world, and move on with her filtered version of reality. But Callie didn't want closure. She wanted control. She didn't want to mourn the loss of our marriage. She wanted to narrate its end. And when she realized I wasn't playing along, she came undone in a way I hadn't expected. Started 2 days after I mailed the ring. I got a call from my old college roommate, Jonas. He was one of the few people who'd seen us in the early years, back when we were still tangled in each other's worlds like roots from the same tree. He sounded cautious, like someone tiptoeing through broken glass. "Hey man, I just saw Callie's post." I felt my stomach tighten. "What post?" She said you walked out because you had some kind of breakdown. Something about emotional instability and not being present for months. He paused. She used a black and white photo. Real dramatic stuff. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. He knew me too well to believe it. But still, it stung. Not because it was a lie, I'd gotten used to that, but because it was so calculated, so public. She was building a story where she was the brave one, the wounded artist who'd endured years of neglect, and I was the emotionally repressed husband who ghosted her without warning. People were commenting things like, "Sending you strength," and "You deserve happiness, queen." It was like watching someone vandalize your house and then get praised for the fresh coat of paint. But it didn't stop there. She started reaching out directly. First, a short text. "You didn't have to make it this dramatic. We could have handled it like adults." I didn't reply. Then another. "You're hurting people by ghosting them, Daryl. You think you're noble, but you're just being avoidant." Still nothing. She finally called. I let it go to voicemail, but I listened. Her voice was steady, like she'd rehearsed every word. "Hey, I know you're still angry. I am too. But we don't have to end things like this. I've been thinking a lot. Maybe we should meet. Talk. Just us." There was a time that message would have sent me running back. I would have convinced myself that the calm in her voice meant things were fixable. That maybe the woman I fell in love with was still somewhere inside the one who humiliated me. But something had shifted. Not just in her, in me. And then came the final push. I got a letter in the mail from her attorney. Not divorce papers. Not yet. Instead, it was a request for mediation. Apparently, she wanted to discuss asset division amicably before moving toward formal separation. Amicably. That word sat in my mouth like ash. I'd spent the last year begging for amicable. I had offered grace, understanding, silence, softness, and she weaponized every bit of it. Now suddenly, she wanted fairness? Now she wanted maturity? I didn't respond to her attorney. Instead, I called Felix, my own lawyer, and told him we were filing immediately. No mediation. No coffee shop apologies. No slow goodbyes. He asked if I was sure. I told him I'd never been more certain of anything. Because here's what I hadn't told anyone yet. Not even Jonas. The night of the rooftop party, just minutes before she gave me that ultimatum, I saw something on her phone. She had handed it to me to take a photo of her with her friends, and the screen lit up with a message from Avery, the same Avery whose hand never seemed far from her waist. Can't wait until this is finally over and we don't have to hide anymore. You looked incredible tonight. Mine. 3 seconds. That's how long I saw it before the notification disappeared. 3 seconds and I saw everything I needed to walk away. And still I said nothing, because I didn't want to explode. I wanted to exit. She had turned our marriage into performance art, and I wasn't interested in playing the fool any longer. She thinks I'm weak because I didn't yell. But silence was my revolution. And now that the curtain's down, she's starting to realize that no one is clapping. A week after I filed, the silence started to feel real. Not the kind you get after a fight, when you're both just waiting for someone to blink first. This was a different silence. Permanent, hollow, and heavy. I could finally breathe again, but I also felt like I'd been holding my breath for years. I stayed in a small rental apartment on the edge of town with peeling wallpaper and a bed that groaned every time I turned over. It was barely furnished, smelled faintly like someone else's bad choices, and yet it felt more like home than the place I just left behind. It didn't come with expectations, or judgment, or curated Instagram backdrops. Then came the knock on the door. It was Callie's sister, Morgan. She was standing there with a tote bag slung over one shoulder, eyes puffy, arms crossed like she didn't even know why she'd driven all the way across town. "I'm not here to take sides," she said as she stepped inside without waiting for permission. "But I thought you should know. She's not doing as well as she pretends." I didn't answer. I just gestured to the sagging couch and waited. "She's been spiraling," Morgan said, sitting down hard. "Drinking too much, staying out until 3 a.m. Bringing people around she doesn't even bother naming. She acts like she's finally free. But I know her. That's not freedom. That's distraction." I nodded slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" She hesitated. "Because she's rewriting it, Daryl. To everyone. The neighbors. Our parents. Even mutual friends. She's painting this picture of you as emotionally distant, controlling, even manipulative. And look, I'm not saying you were perfect. You're not exactly sunshine and jazz hands." That actually made me laugh. For the first time in weeks. "But you didn't deserve what she did," Morgan continued. "I just wanted to say that, out loud, to someone, because it feels like everyone's just eating up her version like it's gospel, and I'm tired of pretending I don't know better." There it was. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That I wasn't imagining the gaslighting, the performative cruelty, the way Callie had subtly dismantled my character in the eyes of everyone we knew. Just enough so that when she finally made her move, she'd already softened the ground beneath her. No one would question it. They'd think, well, she did all she could. Poor thing. But Morgan wasn't done. "There's something else," she said, digging into her tote bag. "I didn't know whether to show you, but you deserve to see it." She handed me a manila envelope. Inside were printouts, screenshots, messages from Callie to Avery. Messages that had been forwarded to Morgan anonymously. Most likely from one of Callie's coworkers who'd finally grown uncomfortable watching the circus unfold. It wasn't just cheating. It was orchestration, plans, timelines, trash-talking me in ways I didn't think she was even capable of. In one message, she wrote, "He'll leave eventually. I'm pushing every button I can. Once he snaps, everyone will see what I've been dealing with." Another, "He's too soft to cheat, too boring to fight back. He'll just disappear. I won't have to lift a finger." I felt my jaw tighten, not in rage, not even in heartbreak, just deep disappointment. She hadn't just given up on the marriage. She'd strategized its collapse like it was a PR campaign. She knew my personality. She knew I wouldn't scream or post angry rants online. She counted on my silence. She wanted to look clean, even as she stood in the wreckage she'd created with her own hands. Morgan looked at me and said quietly, You should tell your side. I shook my head. What would that even look like? Posting screenshots? Making a statement? She shrugged. Maybe not now. Maybe not ever. But just don't carry this like it's your fault. You stayed longer than most would. You fought harder than she deserved. After she left, I sat in that crumbling apartment with those printed messages in my lap, and something shifted in me again. I realized I'd been trying so hard to heal privately, quietly, while she torched every bridge behind her with a megaphone in hand. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't looking for some grand confrontation, but I was done playing the ghost in my own life. So the next morning I did something that scared me. I returned to the neighborhood, not to see her, but to take Moose. He was mine before the marriage. I had the paperwork, the vet records, the chip registry, and she hadn't fought for him. She just let him stay with her out of convenience. I knocked once. She opened the door, wearing a robe and an expression that twisted instantly into disbelief. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I'm taking Moose," I said. She laughed, bitter, mocking. "You're kidding." "No," I said calmly. "I'm done being quiet." She stared at me, that smirk faltering for just a second. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't know what to say. The moment Moose saw me, he lost it. Full body wiggles, whining, tail thumping against the doorframe so hard I thought he'd bruise himself. I dropped to my knees and hugged him like he was a life raft. He licked my face and whimpered like he'd been waiting for this longer than I had. And maybe he had. Dogs always know. They pick up on tension in the walls, the silence that follows slammed doors, the nights when one of you cries quietly into the pillow. He had probably seen more of our slow collapse than either of us admitted out loud. Callie stood behind me with her arms folded, watching like I was stealing something she'd forgotten she owned. "So that's it?" she said flatly. "You just show up and take him?" "No," I replied. "I show up and take back what's mine. You had your chance to keep the pieces that mattered. You threw them out with the rest of me." She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't stick around for the closing monologue. I leashed Moose, gave her one last look that held no hate, only finality, and walked away. Again. Only this time there was no crowd, no rooftop full of watching eyes, no jazz in the background. Just the sound of my dog's paws tapping beside me and the feeling of something in me quietly sealing shut. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't victory. It was reclamation. A man can lose himself piece by piece without realizing. And sometimes, all it takes to start becoming whole again is retrieving a part of yourself that never stopped waiting. But word travels fast in a social circle that thrives on curated chaos. Within days, I started getting strange texts from mutual acquaintances. People who hadn't checked on me once after the separation but were suddenly curious, almost desperate to clarify what had really happened. One message read, "Hey, Callie told us you took Moose by force. That true?" Another, "I know things got messy, but was it necessary to intimidate her like that?" First, I ignored them. I didn't know anyone my version of the truth. But then I realized she was still writing the ending. She was reshaping reality like wet clay, molding a version of events where she was the trembling victim, and I was the vindictive, emotionally unstable ex who showed up unannounced and snatched the dog away like a villain in some made-for-streaming drama. She wanted everyone to believe I had finally snapped. But what she didn't count on, what she never counted on, was people beginning to see through the cracks. Started with Jonas again. He called, voice low and careful. "I saw her out last night," he said. "With Avery. They were all over each other." Someone from her office asked how long they'd been together. She said, "Since spring." "Spring," I repeated. "We were still married until July." "Exactly. People are starting to put it together. You're not the one who broke this, Daryl." I sat there, silent. I didn't know what to say. I'd spent so long internalizing her version of things that hearing someone else acknowledge the truth almost felt foreign. Jonas continued, "She's unraveling, man. People are talking. The same folks who applauded her independence are starting to question why she needed to be so public about a breakup she supposedly didn't care about. The thing about lies is they need constant maintenance. The moment one thread is pulled, the whole web trembles. And Callie had spun hers too wide, too confidently. Soon after, Morgan texted me again. Callie's mom called. She wants to talk to you. I think she's finally starting to see through the performance. I laughed bitterly. Took her long enough? I texted back. But the real surprise came 3 days later, in the form of an envelope at my door. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note. I didn't know where else to send this. I just want you to know I see what she did. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry for staying quiet when you were the only one showing up. You didn't deserve what she made you out to be. There was no signature. Just an old group photo enclosed, one from a barbecue we hosted in the early years, when everything was still warm and simple. I was smiling in the background, arms around Moose, while Callie posed near the center with her friends, her hand barely resting on my shoulder. Even back then, I guess she was already stepping away. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full of realization, clarity, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that no matter how loud her story had been, the truth had started to whisper back. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel invisible anymore. By the time her carefully crafted narrative began to crumble, I was already settling into a new rhythm. Not healed, not yet, but no longer unraveling. Moose and I had a routine. Morning walks along the trail behind the apartment complex, late-night drives with lo-fi music playing on repeat, grocery lists that didn't include her almond milk or her favorite frozen kale pizza. Little things, maybe, but they were mine. I'd spent years compromising every square inch of my life until it barely resembled me at all. Now I was reclaiming it, one plain coffee mug and mismatched sock drawer at a time. But Callie? She was starting to lose her grip. The illusion she'd so proudly painted, the bold, unapologetic woman who had freed herself from her emotionally suffocating marriage, it was starting to look like cheap wallpaper peeling under pressure. People were asking questions. Friends who once reposted her poetic breakup captions were now sharing lunch and side eyes with one another. And the worst thing that can happen to someone who lives for admiration? They stop being the center of the room. It wasn't my doing. I didn't smear her name. I didn't post screenshots or leak texts. I just walked away quietly. And the vacuum left behind started to speak louder than anything she'd ever written. One night, Morgan called again. Her tone wasn't annoyed this time, it was curious, even concerned. "She's spiraling," she said flatly. "Got into an argument with Avery at a gallery opening. Loud, messy. Apparently, she accused him of changing since you left. Like she expected him to step into your shoes. Someone recorded it. It's already circulating in their little friend group." I closed my eyes and let that sink in. The man she'd positioned as the exciting contrast to me, the one who was supposed to be wild, spontaneous, everything I wasn't, had suddenly become not enough. Maybe he never was. Maybe she had mistaken chaos for chemistry. Or maybe she thought once I was out of the picture, everything wrong in her life would fix itself like flipping a switch. Morgan sighed on the other end of the line. "She's talking about you again. Not publicly, just with people. Telling them you left too suddenly. That she's shocked you didn't try harder to save the marriage. She's rewriting the ending now, trying to make it tragic instead of justified." That line hit me harder than I expected. Because that was always her trick, wasn't it? Controlling the narrative. In the beginning, she'd paint herself as the whimsical creative who rescued me from monotony. Later, she became the misunderstood wife who was losing herself in my stability. And now, she wanted to be the grieving ex who'd been abandoned. She didn't want closure. She wanted the last word. But what she didn't understand was that I had already taken it. My silence? That was the last word. And it was louder than any of her poetic monologues. 2 days later, I ran into Jonas again, this time at a mutual friend's housewarming. I hadn't planned to stay long. I was still getting used to being in rooms full of people who used to think of me as Callie's husband. But the weird thing was, the energy had shifted. No one looked at me like I was the problem anymore. If anything, they looked guilty, awkward, like they'd picked the wrong side of a coin they didn't even know they were flipping. Jonas pulled me aside. You know she told everyone you wouldn't last a month without her? He said, sipping from a plastic cup. That you'd be texting her some sad midnight message about how lonely you are? I raised an eyebrow. And now, he smirked. Now she's the one showing up to parties pretending not to look at the door every time it opens. I didn't smile. Not because I didn't find it satisfying, I did. But because it was sad. Sad that even now, she was still waiting for the performance to resume. Still hoping for the final act where I returned, head down, apologetic, ready to play my part again. Except I wasn't in the audience anymore. That same night, just as I was leaving, I got a message from an unknown number. No name, no context. You never even fought for us. You just walked. Who does that? I didn't need to ask who it was from. I stared at the screen for a while before responding. Someone who finally realized the fight was never fair, and who stopped playing a game that was always rigged. She didn't respond. Not that night. Not the next day. But she read it. The 3 dots popped up, then vanished. And just like that, the silence returned. But this time, it didn't hurt. This time, it felt like freedom. 6 months have passed since I walked off that rooftop without saying a word. No dramatic exit. No finger pointing. Just the sound of my keys in my hand and a decision I didn't know I had the strength to make. Not until I made it. I didn't storm out to prove a point. I didn't leave hoping she'd chase me. I walked because, for once, I wanted to choose peace instead of another round of emotional chess with someone who always moved the pieces while I wasn't looking. The man I am today doesn't look like the one she left behind. My hair's longer. My back's straighter. I sleep better. I've built new habits, small rituals that ground me. Early morning walks with Moose, quiet dinners where I don't get mocked for overcooking the pasta, weekend hikes with no one rolling their eyes because I double-check the trail map. And you know what's crazy? I laugh more now. Real laughter. Not the kind that comes out of your mouth because you're trying to diffuse tension or keep someone from getting bored. The kind that bubbles up because your body feels light, unburdened. I didn't even realize how heavy she'd become. Not just her, but the performance of her, of us. I recently started dating again. Nothing serious yet, just coffee and conversation and learning how to be around someone who doesn't make me feel like I'm always one sentence away from being corrected. And it's not about moving on. It's about being. Just being someone who's allowed to take up space without apology. As for Callie, I haven't heard from her since that last message. But I see the occasional glimpse of her online. Another filtered selfie with a vague caption. Another attempt to frame her chaos as growth. I don't feel anger anymore. Just distance. Like a story I read once and don't need to reread. And maybe that's the biggest victory. Not proving anything, not showing her I'm better off. Just quietly living in a life that finally feels mine. To anyone out there who's been dismissed, rewritten, minimized by someone who expected you to just take it. Hear this. You don't need to burn bridges to rebuild your own house. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away without a single line of dialogue. Let them perform. You live. Thanks for listening to my story here on Reddit Confessions. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt erased in your own relationship, or had a moment where walking away changed everything, drop it in the comments below. What was the turning point for you? When did the silence finally speak louder than the shouting? Your stories matter, and somewhere out there, someone needs to hear them. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful confessions, right here on Reddit Confessions. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve to be seen.